Today we're going to be creating unattended answer files for Windows 7 and Windows deployment services within Windows Server 2012. There's a few things I'd like to go over with you before we get started. First, you're going to need to be working within a Windows Active Directory domain environment. Within your domain, you need to have at least one domain controller with the Active Directory Directory Services role installed and configured. You also need to have a DNS server, a DHCP server, and a fully configured Windows deployment server with a captured Windows 7 image in place. Also, you need to install the Windows ADK or WAIK in order to work with the Windows System Image Manager in order to create your unattended answer files. By the end of this exercise, you'll have created a fully automated Windows 7 deployment to your target machine. During this process, it'll automatically join this machine to your domain, and it'll automatically log into a domain account that you've already created. So let's get started, and thanks again for tuning in. Alright, as we're getting started here, you'll notice that I have the Server Manager linked to my taskbar on my Windows 8 machine. This is because I have installed and enabled the latest version of RSAT. So now we'll go ahead and I'll go into my server, and I'm going to open up a remote desktop session. Alright, the first thing that I'm going to do now that I'm in my server is I'm going to open up the Active Directory Users and Computers console. Within this console, you'll see that I've created a new organizational unit called Test OU. And within this organizational unit, you'll see that I have an administrative account called Admin1, and he is a member of the Domain Admins group. And then I've also created a user account called Dude, and he is simply a member of the Domain Users group. This is going to be key to what we're going to be doing later. But what I've done on both of these is I've set a default password for both of them, and they have the same password. Obviously, in a production environment, your Active Directory structure is going to look a lot different, but for simplicity's sake, this will get you through the exercise. So if you haven't created users like this, go ahead and pause the video and do that now. Okay, moving on. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close the Active Directory Users and Computers console, and we're going to move on, and we're going to go ahead and open up the Windows Deployment Services console. Now in this console, I have a number of install image groups. As you can see, I've got one for Server 2012, Windows 7, and Windows 8. And you can see that I've got a lot of different images within each image group. And for the sake of this exercise, I've disabled all of them except for a captured Windows 7 professional image that I have named Windows 7 Updated. You'll see that this image is enabled because it does not have a red arrow on it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you my boot images folder. And as you can see, I've got a variety of boot images that correspond with each version of Windows that I have. I have boot images for Windows 8, Windows 7, and Server 2012, as well as corresponding capture images for each one as well. What I found in my research is that if you're deploying an image, technically you can use the Server 2012 boot image and everything will deploy fine. However, when you're looking to capture a reference machine, you need capture images that correspond directly to the version of Windows that you're using. But anyways, for the sake of this exercise, we're only concerned with the Windows 7 Professional 64-bit boot image. As you can see, I've called it Windows 7 Boot, and it is currently enabled. Now, before we get started in creating the answer file, what I'm going to do is I'm going to export my referenced Windows 7 image and save it to the WDS Client Unattended folder. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click on my image, and I'm going to select Export Image. You'll see that I'm going to browse back, and I'm going to save it to the Remote Install folder. I'm going to name it win7custom.wim, and then go ahead and save it. As you can see now, it's exporting the image. Now this can take quite a bit of time, so for the sake of this video, I've sped the process up quite a bit. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and open up the C drive. I'm going to create a new folder called Distribution. This is going to be our distribution share. You'll see how we're going to use this in a little bit. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to browse to the Programs folder within my Start menu. I'm going to go to Windows Kits, Windows ADK, and I'm going to open up the Windows System Image Manager. The first thing that we want to do is create a distribution share. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on Select a Distribution Share and select Create a Distribution Share. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to point to the folder that I created earlier called Distribution, and then I'm going to go ahead and select Open. As you can see, the Windows System Image Manager has created 3 folders within this share. I have the OEM folder, an out-of-box drivers folder, and a packages folder. So the next step in the process is we want to select a Windows image to create a catalog file from. This is a necessary step in the creation of our unattended answer file. So I'm going to go ahead and right click on Select a Windows image and say Select Windows Image. What I'm going to do is I'm going to browse to the Remote Install folder, and as you can see I have my Win7 Custom.wim selected. I'm going to go ahead and select this file and select Open. It'll give you this little warning message saying that the catalog file for this image cannot be opened for the following reason, because it can't find a catalog file. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a catalog file based on this image. So we're going to go ahead and select Yes. Once again, this process can take quite a while, but for the sake of the video I've sped this process up quite a bit. Okay, now that that's finished, as you can see, I open up the Components folder and I have a lot of different options that I can configure for our unattended answer file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and expand this window. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to create a new answer file. So I'm going to go up to the File menu and select Create New Answer File. And as you can see, I want to browse down to AMD 64 Microsoft Windows International Core WinPE, and I'm going to go ahead and right click and I'm going to add this to Pass 1 Windows PE. With this first image, this is just simply for Windows deployment services. So what we're going to be doing is simply configuring the locale settings as well as the disk configuration. We're going to be doing the specialized pass and the Windows out-of-box experience passes in a second answer file later on. So I'm going to start by highlighting the Windows International Core WinPE neutral, and we're going to set our input locale settings. Since I'm in the United States, I'm going to select EN-US. I'm going to go down to System Locale and select EN-US. UI language, once again, EN-US. For the UI language fallback, once again, EN-US. And user locale, EN-US. Now if you live in another country or you prefer a different keyboard setting, go ahead and do a search, and on Microsoft's website you can see a whole bunch of different options. For instance, if you live in Great Britain, you can use ENGB, as well as a number of different keyboard options that exist out in the world. Okay, the next step is I'm going to select the Setup UI language option, and I'm going to set my UI language once again to EN-US. Now that that's configured, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next step. So I'm going to go ahead and go over to the left once again, and I'm going to scroll down to AMD 64 Microsoft Windows Setup Neutral. I'm going to go ahead and expand this, and in particular I want the disk configuration option. So I'm going to right click it and I'm going to select Add Setting to Pass 1 Windows PE. Then I'm going to go ahead and scroll down a little more, and I'm going to select Windows Deployment Services, and I'm going to right click and select Add Setting to Pass 1 Windows PE. Now we're going to go ahead and start with the disk configuration option. So I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to select the disk configuration. I'm going to right click it and select Insert New Disk. For the disk ID, I'm going to select 0, and for Will Wipe Disk, I'm going to go ahead and select True. Now I'm going to go back over and expand this, and you'll see I have two options, the Create Partition and the Modify Partition option. So I'm going to first go to the Create Partition option. I'm going to right click on it and select Insert New Create Partition. Within the new create partition, I'm going to set the extend option to true. I'm going to go ahead and set the order to 1 and the type to primary. Now that I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and go over to the modify partitions option. I'm going to right click and select insert new modify partition. The first option that I'm going to select is I'm going to set the active option to true. I'm going to set the extend option to false. I'm going to set the format option to MTFS. I'm going to go ahead and give this volume a name. I'm going to call it system. I'm going to go ahead and assign it a drive letter, which is C. And I'm going to assign the order number to 1 and the partition ID to 1. What this will basically do is it'll erase the hard drive that's on the machine. It'll go ahead and format it to NTFS and assign it a drive letter, which is C. This basically sets the stage for installing Windows through Windows Deployment Services. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and configure the Windows Deployment Services option. This is important because, as you know, I have a lot of different installation images on my server. So what we're going to need to do is point to a specific image within Windows Deployment Services. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my Windows Deployment Services console once again so I get the exact information I need from my captured image. Alright, so now that I have my Deployment Services console open, I'm going to go over here and click on the arrow to expand my servers. And as you can see, I have my server, which is extra.rollingharrier.local. I'm going to click on the little arrow to expand that. As you can see, I have my image groups. I have Windows Server 2012, Windows 7, and Windows 8. What we're focusing on now is the Windows 7 group. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. As you can see, what I want to focus on now is my captured custom Windows 7 image. So I'm going to right click on that and select Properties. And as you can see, down towards the middle, I have the file name, which is win7c-2.wim. And this is just what the system renamed it as. So I'm going to highlight this name. I'm going to copy it using Control-C. I'm going to go ahead and go over to the file name. I'm going to select that and paste it into there. And also we need to get the exact image name. So I'm going to go up to the top here and highlight Win7 Updated. I'm going to go ahead and copy that with Control-C. I'm going to go back over to my System Image Manager and under Image Name, I'm going to go ahead and paste it in there. Now what we need to do is make sure that we're pointing to the correct image group, which is Windows 7. So I'm just simply going to type in Windows 7. Now that I've made sure that all of these options exactly match the image that I'm deploying, I'm going to go ahead and select the Install To option. I'm going to set the disk ID to 0 and the partition ID to 1. And this basically points exactly to the proper partition that we want to install Windows to. Now what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to set in some login credentials. This will allow us to access the deployment server through the domain without any additional user input. And as you recall earlier, we've created a domain account for an admin as well as for a user. So in this particular instance, I'm going to type in the name of my domain, which is rollingharrier.local. I'm going to type in the username for my administrative account, which is admin1. And I'm going to type in the password that I've created for this administrative account, which is password in the form of $$W0RD. Now that I've finished configuring all the options for this first answer file, I'm going to go ahead and go up to the Tools menu, and I'm going to go ahead and validate the answer file just to make sure I didn't make any mistakes. As you can see down below, I have no warnings or errors, so this answer file is good to go. Now I'm going to go up to the File menu, and I'm going to save this answer file. I'm going to go ahead and save it into the WDS Client Unattended folder, which is inside of the Remote Install folder, which is located at the C drive. You can see that corresponds to the folder path up top. What I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to rename this and save it as WDS Client Unattended.xml. Now that I've saved my answer file, for now I'm going to go ahead and minimize the Windows System Image Manager. I'm going to go back into my Windows Deployment Services console. And what I want to do is I want to select my deployment server, which is extra.rollingharrier.local. I'm going to right-click on it and select Properties. Within the Properties menu, I'm going to go ahead and select the Client tab. And under the Client tab, I'm going to check the box saying Enable Unattended Installation. And since we are doing 64-bit unattended installations only, I'm going to go ahead and select the corresponding Browse button on the x64 architecture. Now I'm going to browse to my WDS client unattend file, which is located in the WDS client unattend folder. I'm going to go ahead and select this file and say Open. Now that that's properly selected, I'm going to go ahead and apply the changes and select OK. Basically what we've done is we've created the first of our 2 unattended answer files. This one is used in particular for Windows Deployment Services prior to the image being deployed on the system. This performs the initial preparation of the machine by wiping the hard drive and then logging into the domain and selecting the proper image to install from. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and go back into the Windows System Image Manager. And within this, I'm going to create a new answer file. Now we are ready to create some new settings. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the AMD Microsoft Windows Shell Setup Neutral. And if you look closely, you'll see that in my particular catalog file, I have 2 Windows Shell Setup Neutral options. What I'm doing just for safety's sake is I'm selecting the older one, or the one with the lower number. You'll see that one is 6.1.7600 16385, and one just below it 6.1.7601 17514. Just to err on the side of caution, I'm going to select on the older one because I've used it before and I know it works properly. What I'm going to do in this scenario is I'm just going to simply right-click it and add all the options to Pass 4 Specialize. As you can see, this option comes with a lot of subcomponents, but we really don't need to use any of them. So what I'm going to do is simply remove the rest of them by highlighting them and using the Delete key. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to configure these options. I'm going to set my computer name to Test Client PC. I'm also going to need to enter in a product key. What I'm doing for the sake of this exercise is using a generic KMS client setup key. I've had a lot of questions about this in the past, and I want to make clear with you guys that although this is a key that will allow you to install Windows, this is still not a live key, and you will in fact have to change your product key in order to properly activate Windows later. If you don't, you'll simply lose functionality with Windows, so I would advise you to change it later. The reason I'm using this particular key is because I don't have a site license key, which is required when performing an unattended installation of Windows. What I'm going to do in this instance is just use this generic key and simply change it to a proper product key later on in the future. Now moving on, as you can see, I have the registered organization and the registered owner option configured. And now I'm going to go ahead and set my time zone to Pacific Standard Time since I'm up in the United States. If you're located in a different time zone, once again you can open up the command prompt and run the command called tzutil/L, and you can look up all sorts of different time zones and their corresponding codes. Now that we've configured all of the corresponding options that we need, I'm going to go ahead and go down to the left menu and scroll down and select AMD 64 Microsoft Windows Unattended Join. Once again, as you can see, I have 2 identical choices for this option. Once again, I'm going to err on the side of caution and I'm going to use the older version instead of the newer one. So I'm going to go ahead and right click on it and select Add Setting to Pass 4 Specialize. What this will do is this will join our new computer into the domain in a fully automated fashion. But before we can make this happen, we have to point to the proper domain as well as provide administrative credentials. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select Join Domain and I'm going to type in my domain, which is rollingharrier.local. And I'm going to leave everything at default, including unsecure join. I'm going to leave that false. And as you can see, I have a provisioning box, and for this exercise I don't need it, so I'm going to go ahead and delete it. I'm going to go back to the credentials option. Once again, I'm going to type in my domain, which is rollingharrier.local. I'm going to go ahead and move down and set the administrative password, which is once again capital P, lowercase a, $, lowercase w, 0RD. I'm going to set my username of my administrative account, which is admin1. And now that we've got these properly configured, we can now go ahead and select more options for our answer file. And I'm going to select AMD 64 Microsoft Windows International Core Neutral. I'm going to right click on this and select Pass 7 UBI system. This is where we're going to set our locale settings. Now once again, we're doing this for a second time because the previous time we did it, we'd set it for Windows Deployment Services, and now we're going to set it up for the actual operating system. So once again, I'm going to set my input locale to EN-US, system locale to EN-US. I'm going to set my UI language option to EN-US. I'm going to set my UI language fallback option to EN-US and my user locale option to EN-US. Now that I've properly configured those options, I'm going to go back to my left-hand menu once again. I'm going to go over to the AMD 64 Microsoft Windows Shell Setup Neutral. Once again, I'm selecting the older one of the two. And there's some specific options that I want from this. So I'm going to go ahead and select Auto Logon. And I'm going to add that to Pass 7 UBI system. I'm going to select the OOBE or Out of Box Experience option, and I'm going to add this to Pass 7 UBI system. And I'm going to also select the User Accounts option and send it to Pass 7 UBI system. Now that I've got all the configuration options I need, now it's time to go ahead and customize them. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select the one up top, which is the Microsoft Windows Shell Setup Neutral. I'm going to go ahead and set my time zone once again to Pacific Standard Time. Leave all my other options to default. I'm going to go ahead to the Auto Logon option, and this option is actually pretty fun. This is what basically logs us into our domain account automatically. So in previous deployments of Windows that I've demonstrated, I've come to the login screen. Well, this bypasses the login screen and sends the user right to the desktop. So once again, I'm going to specify my domain, which is rollingharrier.local. I'm going to go ahead and set the enabled option to true. The login count, I'm just going to use a random number and set it to 5. The username, I'm going to use my domain user, which is dude. And now I'm going to go ahead and go to the password option, and I'm going to enter in the password for my domain user, which is password, which is capital P, lowercase a, $, lowercase w, 0, lowercase r, lowercase d. Now I'm going to go ahead and move on to the OOBE option. I'm going to set the hide EULA page to true, my network location to work. I'm going to set protect your PC to 1. And I'm basically going to leave the other two options blank. I don't need to configure those right now. Next, I need to create a local user account on this particular machine. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set an administrative password. Once again, I'm going to use the password option in capital P, lowercase a, $, lowercase w, 0RD. And I use that as kind of a fail-safe, so at least I have something to log on locally with. I'm going to right-click on Domain Accounts and select Insert New Domain Account. I want to have it reference the proper domain, so I'm going to set rollingharrier.local. And I'm going to go ahead and insert a new domain account. And I'm going to call this one Domain Users, name Dude. Now I'm going to go ahead and move on to my local accounts. I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to select Insert New Local Account. I'm going to expand this option and I'm going to describe this local account as a built-in account. I'm going to go ahead and give the display name of this account Client 1. I'm going to go ahead and assign Client 1 to the local administrators group. And basically, once again, for the name, I'm going to call it Client 1 once again. I'm going to go ahead and assign this local account a password, and I'm going to use the same password that I've been using, which is password. Of course, stuff like this you would not want to replicate in a production environment for security reasons, but for the sake of simplicity within this exercise, this is what I'm doing. Now that I've finished configuring all the options for this particular answer file, I'm going to go ahead and go up to the Tools option and quickly validate the answer file to make sure I haven't made any mistakes or left anything out. And as you can see, there's no warnings or errors. So now I'm going to go ahead and go up to the File menu and save the answer file. I'm going to save this file once again into the WDS Client Unattended folder. I'm going to name this file oobe_unattend.xml. I'm going to go ahead and save it. Now that we've fully configured both of our answer files, I'm going to go ahead and close the Windows System Image Manager. I'm going to go back to my Windows Deployment Services console. And this time I'm going to browse to my Windows 7 image group. I'm going to select my Win 7 updated custom captured image. I'm going to go ahead and right click on it and select Properties. And within the properties, I want to allow this image to install in unattended mode. So I'm going to select that checkbox. And I'm going to go ahead and select the Select File button. And as you can see, you're prompted with an unattended file path. I'm going to select Browse. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to browse to the particular folder that we saved our unattended answer file to, which is located at the root of C. We're going to go ahead and go into the Remote Install folder, and I'm going to open up the WDS Client Unattended folder. And once again, I'm going to select the oobe unattended file. This particular answer file does all the specialized work for the actual image being installed onto the machine. Once I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and select OK. I'm going to apply the changes and go ahead and select OK to close out the Properties window. Now that we've created our answer files and have everything properly configured within Windows Deployment Services, I'm going to go ahead and close out my remote session to my server and go back into my client machine and create a Hyper-V virtual machine in order to deploy the image to. So now I'm back on my desktop and I'm using Windows 8 Professional. So I'm going to go into my Hyper-V Manager. I'm going to right click on my virtual machine host, which is Slick, and create a new virtual machine. I'm going to go ahead and go through the basic configuration steps and specify the name and location. I'm going to call this one Win 7 and save it to the default location on my C drive. I'm going to use dynamic memory for this machine. I'm going to allocate 16 gigabytes of RAM to it. For networking, I'm going to connect it to my predefined external switch called Switch 1. And I'm going to go ahead and create a new virtual hard disk, setting it to 50 gigabytes. And I'm going to call it win7test.vhdx. I'm going to select the option to install the operating system through a network-based installation server. And once I reach the summary page, I'm going to select Finish. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to right-click on my virtual machine and go into the Settings menu. Within the Settings menu, first I'm going to allocate more processors to this machine. So I'm going to give it 4 since I'm running a Core i7. Next, I'm going to go ahead and configure the boot order. I'm going to move my blank virtual hard disk up to the top, leaving the legacy network adapter just below it. Now I'm going to go ahead and configure the memory option. And as you can see, my startup memory is set to 16 gigabytes, but my maximum amount of memory is a lot higher than that. But I want my maximum threshold to also be 16 gigabytes, so I'm going to change that. Once I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and select OK. Now that my options are all in place, I'm going to go ahead and connect to and start this virtual machine. As you can see, it successfully contacted my Windows deployment server. Now it's loading my boot WIM file that I've specified earlier. As you can see, it's successfully beginning the Windows setup process without any user interface prompts or confirmations. And after a brief pause, the server initiates the session and the installation goes underway. And once the base installation has completed, it automatically restarts the computer. Once the computer's been restarted, Windows is automatically configuring devices, services, and installing drivers. And once it's done that, it seamlessly authenticates into the domain and logs into the user account. As you can see, I've successfully installed Windows on this virtual machine without any input from myself, and it has automatically logged me into my domain user account. I can go ahead and improve this by opening up the Start menu and right-clicking on Computer and select Properties. And as you can see, if you scroll down to full computer name or my fully qualified domain name, which is testclientpc.rollingharrier.local, this validates that I have successfully joined this machine into the domain. And also, as you can see, I have the custom program that I've installed onto Windows, which is Firefox. Of course, you can install other software as you see fit for your particular user, such as Wireshark or other useful utilities. And now that we've verified that this process completed successfully, I'm going to go ahead and shut down my virtual machine. And to verify that everything works smoothly, I'm going to go back into a remote session with my server. I'm going to once again open up Active Directory Users and Computers. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the Computers folder. And as you can see, look, there's my new computer. Test Client PC has been successfully joined into the domain. And this wraps up today's tutorial. Thanks again for tuning in and watching. And if you have any questions, comments, or ideas, feel free to let me know.